The Field of 68 Media Network presents Red is the New Orange, a Syracuse basketball podcast.
Vince intercepts a pass, breakaway for the freshman guard, he flies and slams! Aerial assault from Judah Mintz. Looking to go back door to Bell, they get it to a near corner three, knocks it down! Chris Bell, the sharpshooter.
Bringing you everything you need to know out of the 315.
Up top, Williams surges ahead, up with the right hand and in. A pretty up and under move from Benny Williams to beat his man. Over to Taylor. He skips into the lane, puts up a floater, and drops in.
Let's get it started with your hosts, Ian Unsworth and Johnny Gadamowitz.
We have seen the Syracuse Orange play basketball for the first time in 2024-25, and we are back to talk about it. Ian Unsworth, Johnny Gadamowitz with you on the Field of 68 Podcast Network for the first post-game reaction on Red is the New Orange. Follow us on Twitter, F68_Cuse. We will now have new episodes every Monday and Friday since the season's getting rolling. And you can also listen, Apple, Spotify, Megaphone, and see our faces on YouTube. The Field of 68 Podcast Network is where you can find us there. Syracuse finally broke out those script uniforms again. How beautiful are those things. 101-73, the final over Clarion, a Division II school in the PSAC. We learned from Matt Park during the broadcast, Johnny, that Clarion was picked to finish 7th out of 8 teams in its conference. We knew they didn't stand a chance. But we also knew there was a lot to learn about this Syracuse team. Brand new roster, freshmen to make an impact, transfers to make an impact. What surprised you the most about a 101-73 win?
Well, I think, you hear the term litmus test a lot of times early in the season, Ian. I don't think this game even qualifies as a litmus test because of the different level of play that you get with both of these teams. What surprised me, we were expecting to see different groupings, but I think I was a little taken aback by just how much experimentation seemed to be going on from a Syracuse standpoint. Naturally, you expect that. Red Autry's got to see what some of these guys look like in real game action. But you look at the revolving door of minutes. I mean, the only guy who played more than 21 minutes in the game was Jaquan Carlos. Maybe a testament to him handling majority of point guard duties. More on that on another day. But I think Red Autry's willingness to say, okay, yeah, we're going to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall. We're going to see what sticks. We're going to try different things, try different guys at different spots. And honestly, to his credit, I'm glad he did, because you hope that you walk out of that exhibition yesterday, even if he won't let on in his press conference, you hope that he will have answered a lot of those questions. If not definitively, at least seeing it in real time, now has a better idea about how certain things might mesh as time goes on.
Peter Mastorovich was in the starting five. I think that was the biggest surprise for most people. The Frenchman, 6'9", true freshman. He's only been on campus for about a month and a half. John Rothstein tweeted, last week, that he was expecting big things from the Frenchman. He was okay. Nothing to write home about. Just okay. Clearly playing against an undersized team, a team that couldn't hold a candle to the size of Mastorovich, Eddie Lampkin inside, who had a great day. Lampkin is, I think, where we start with the transfer crop. Because even though he only finished with 8 points in 19 minutes, there was a lot of dynamic offense that started with 44, the big bowling ball of an Orange center.
It seems like he wasn't afraid to initiate, too, which, for a center, you love to see, right? Everybody knows that gone are the days where all you want is a back-to-the-basket big. So Lampkin being able to come up to the top of the key, to be the recipient of that first pass, and then kind of work his way from there, that's something that I think is going to bode really well for Syracuse. Obviously, he's got size. We know about the size. We know about the 6'11" frame. We know about his tenacity defensively and his ability to get after it on the glass. But if he can just be another token in the offense that is more than just a body, that's something that is great. And I don't know if we necessarily expected that a ton with the amount of guards on this team, with the amount of guys that Syracuse has that can kind of space the floor a little bit from a forward standpoint. Lampkin wasn't one who at least I thought was going to be involved in that as well. But it looks like that he's going to contribute from a spacing aspect quite nicely in.
Talking about spacing, Jair Davis came off the bench and played decent minutes in the front court, 18 of them, but 3 of his 4 shots were threes. Yes, this is a time for improvement, but we could tell the 3-ball is not necessarily Jair Davis's game. He shot under 30% last year at Delaware, and that was a low point in an otherwise great season. Continuing with the front court, I think we started here. We might as well wrap this up. I was really impressed with Donnie Freeman. Not just because of the jaw-dropping dunk off the Carlos pass from the floor.
That was sick.
It was very cool, and I hope we see that a lot. But his aggressiveness on both sides of the floor was great to see. 16 points, 7 rebounds, 16 points, the second most on the Cuse behind J.J. Starling, who had 17, and 7 rebounds tied for the team most with Eddie Lampkin. But Freeman got the ball on the offensive end and was looking to make things happen.
That's what impresses me the most. The number that stands out the most when you look at his line from yesterday, I think has to be the fact that he took 13 shots.
And all different types of shots, too. Back to the basket, posting up, facing up 18 feet, driving his smaller defender towards the cup. He showed an ability to score in so many different ways that we haven't seen from a Syracuse freshman in the past couple of years.
And let's not forget, Ian, this is a freshman, albeit in an exhibition, playing in his first real game.
Yeah.
Real game. A lot of times, freshmen come in a situation like that, moment you've been waiting your whole life for. Maybe you'll be a little timid. Maybe you'll be a little nervous. I'd argue Donnie Freeman taking 13 shots is the exact opposite of that. He's got the confidence. He knows that he can be a dude on this team. So I'm all for it, and I think the more you kind of get him comfortable, the more reps, obviously. Look, the guy took 13 shots in 20 minutes. Is that a great thing down the stretch in ACC play? Is that going to be where he falls? We'll see, but still, you like the aggressiveness for sure.
Chris Bell, 16 points, came off the bench.
Yeah, Jair Davis doesn't need 3-pointers. That's because Chris Bell will handle the 3-pointers. I think every shot he took was a 3 yesterday.
Yes, 4 for 8 from distance, 4 for 4 from the free throw line. Not a whole lot to worry about with Chris Bell. He does look more comfortable putting the basketball on the floor. Drew a couple fouls getting to the cup, which was great to see. Moving to the backcourt. Oh, actually, one more thing before we move to the backcourt. Naheem McLeod, 5 minutes, 6 points, but only played in the second half. A non-factor. A little surprising.
Yeah, a little bit. I think if you go back to our last episode, too, we were chatting how we were interested to see the minutes breakdown of Lampkin and McLeod.
I didn't really think Mastorovich would factor in at all.
That's true. And now that's another body that you can insert into that conversation. I'll say this, though, about McLeod. I think his role is still going to be a lot bigger than you would have guessed based on the indications from yesterday.
Okay. And once you play a bigger team with slower bigs,
exactly,
that might make a lot of sense. But it's not like the ACC, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is flush with big men necessarily. So now moving on to the backcourt, where your starters were Jaquan Carlos, J.J. Starling, and Lucas Taylor, which I found a bit interesting. Taylor does help space the floor, but he wasn't very effective in his 17 minutes. Just 3 points and 1 of 6 from the field.
I'd be surprised if this is the same starting 5 that we get on opening night. I'd be very surprised. I think the 5 that started the game were just the first group of 5 that Red wanted to see how they meshed together. And I'm not reading too deeply into it. But yeah, you're right. Taylor did play 17 minutes, just 1 of 6 from the floor. Felt like, wasn't necessarily fitting in right from the jump. And that's fine. But I think he is one guy whose impact still is a little muddled. You're not exactly sure, okay, is he that first guy off the bench? We talked about his nature of being that microwave coming in and putting up points in a hurry. Didn't really see that yesterday. So if the offensive struggles do get prolonged, does that kind of leave him lost in the mix? Time will tell, but he's someone who we're going to have a very close eye on as we continue to progress forward.
How'd you feel about the Orange defensively, Johnny? That was a big sticking point for most people.
Yeah, Red Autry didn't seem to love it. I mean, the first thing he said in his press conference after the game was plenty of work to do defensively and rebounding the basketball. That said, I had no major gripes. I mean, you're going up against a D2 school in a perfect world. When you look at the final number, would you like for the shooting percentage to be a little bit lower than 48%? Of course you would. But I don't know, like, I'm not watching that game and sounding the alarm as far as any real lapses from a defensive standpoint. I think a lot of it comes down to the backcourt and how those minutes are gonna play out when we get into the real heat of things here. But, nothing worth writing home about, but no major issues either, at least for me early.
I think a lot of the defensive lapses were blow-bys, too.
Yeah, that's what it felt like.
Guys didn't want to commit fouls. Clarion got to the rim a couple times when it might have been a bit too easy. But, I mean, Syracuse was up 25-7 about 7 minutes in and kept that margin or a greater margin for the rest of the game. So I understand turning off the jets, easing off the gas pedal a little bit when, at the end of the day, you're not worried about drawing a charge against Clarion. You are worried about drawing a charge against Wake Forest down the stretch of the ACC season. But 46 points in the paint of 73 total points is not a great number. So that'll be something to improve on. But wrapping up our Clarion talk here, I think the most important takeaway from this game was how well the backcourt of Carlos and Starling played together. Let's get Red Autry's take on it.
I thought they played well on the offensive end. The defensive end is rebounding the basketball. They did a good job, but I challenge those guys. They should be getting 5 to 6 rebounds a game. But I thought they played well. I thought they shared the ball. Last couple of days, they haven't had a chance to play. We've been really keeping this thing competitive for the whole, preseason, and so they had a chance to play. Didn't know how that was going to work, but they really played well together.
So as we've mentioned, the teams in practice are not the teams you'll see on the floor because Red Autry is still constantly experimenting and getting this group together. When you haven't played with someone in about a week, or at least that's what it's made to sound like, these two had no problem being in sync on the offensive end.
No, and I think it's because their games complement each other quite nicely, right, Ian? I mean, Jaquan Carlos appears to be that true by-the-book definition point guard, and J.J. Starling is showing every indication of wanting to take that next step from a scoring level. Now, if you could do it from all three levels, that relationship is only going to foster and grow even more. But I think just on paper, with each of their skill sets, and this isn't a surprise, right? Throughout our podcasts over the course of the offseason, we've been talking about how this could be a real nice marriage here as far as Carlos's ability to handle the ball and Starling's ability to work beside him. All you got to do is go look at the Judah Mintz, JJ Starling chemistry over the course of the past couple of years. So really encouraging, and it figures to be really a big bright spot of this year's team.
It seemed like Elijah Moore was the third guard off the bench as well. I'm not sure if he's going to get called Elijah Moore or if he's going to get called Choppa, because he was repeatedly called Choppa up and down through the course of the broadcast, so he might be rebranded by the midway point of the season. 7 points for him. All of his shots were threes as well. But hope he takes on a bit more ball handling responsibility. When Carlos sat and Moore came in, it was all Starling doing most of the ball handling, and that's when he got a good amount of his points.
I'd be curious to see next time around here against Slippery Rock, which, yes, is a real school. That's coming up on Wednesday night. Is Red Autry as liberal, so to speak, with those minute distributions, or do you come out of this Clarion game with the observations that you have in mind and start to give us something that isn't a finished product by any means, but maybe a little more indicative of what we'll see when the games really start to matter? And I think the reason I bring that point up now is because I think Elijah Moore is someone whose minutes could give us a very indication of which way Red is leaning. Is it going to be another all hands on deck, let's keep tinkering, or do things maybe get trimmed down a little bit? You give JJ and you give Carlos as much time together as possible just to kind of get them ready for what a real game might look
Johnny,
like.
I think if we're trimming things down, Kyle Cuff is the first member of the fat that is getting trimmed.
Yes.
It's not going to be Elijah Moore because Cuff in 9 minutes committed 3 fouls and had 1 made 3. I don't think he's got much room as a contributor on this team.
Yeah, it's a clouded backcourt. We've said that all along. Unfortunately, Cuff is probably the guy who gets the short end of the stick there. We've mentioned it before. His defensive prowess is the biggest thing he's got going for him. So maybe in a kind of niche situation, he adds some value. But yes, I don't know what his minutes are going to look like when you get into the crux of conference play.
One more time, 101-73, the final. Syracuse over Clarion. A win, exhibition-wise, that was never in doubt. And I think we all saw that Syracuse is far from a finished product. That's what you want your team to do at the end of the day. Improve and be playing the best basketball you possibly can down the stretch of the ACC season. Let's back out a little bit and zoom in from a 30,000-foot lens and talk about the ACC. You mentioned the stretch of the season. Syracuse is projected to lose 6 of its last 9 games per Ken Pomeroy and Ken Pom. If you're a listener of the pod, you know how much I specifically love Ken Pom and our basketball analytics community. Ken Pom has Syracuse projected to go 17-13, 10-10 in conference play. Last year, the Orange got to 20 wins, arguably playing a tougher non-conference schedule. You got 3 bye games, Lemoyne, Colgate, and Youngstown State, and then projected to lose to Texas, who Ken Pom has 18th in the country to start the season. But all things considered, 10-10 in ACC play, Johnny. Do you think that's a number that the Orange can beat?
I do. I think best case scenario, they're much better than 500. You look at the ACC preseason poll, they come in at number 11 out of, let's make mention of this because it's important now, 18 ACC schools. I think a lot of people in the Salt City would see that number 11 and kind of view it as a little bit of the chip on their shoulder. I know it's a new look squad, but year 2 of a new head coach. You've got a good thing going. You've got some new pieces. But yeah, I think if this squad reaches its full potential, it is not unrealistic to say that they will be above 500 in conference play. In fact, they better be above 500. I would say if they don't hit that 500 threshold in ACC play, then they disappoint this year. And we're having some much larger conversations as far as some problems.
The ACC is going to look very different from what we're used to over the past couple of years. Because a lot of the familiar faces that you know from many different schools are gone. Louisville has reloaded. I don't know if we can clown on them this year like we did over the past.
You can only get away with that for so long.
Pat Kelsey brought in a whole new crop of folks. North Carolina State has lost 4 of its starting 5 that made it to the Final Four last year. Armando Bacot is gone. Jeremy Roach is gone. PJ Hall is gone. Quentin Post is gone. Tony Bennett is gone. Think about that. That's almost all the All-ACC first team from last year. And a top 5 coach in the game of college basketball.
Right.
So let's start here, Johnny. With all the new in the ACC, what's a team you think might surprise some folks?
Yeah, I for some reason, Ian, I look at Georgia Tech and I don't know, I think some of it comes down to, I'm looking at this preseason poll right now, and those bottom half of teams, the SMUs, the Florida States, the Boston Colleges, I don't think Georgia Tech belongs in that echelon. Now, do I think they'll be a top 3 team in the conference? I'm not so sure. But I think that the Yellow Jackets proved at times last year they were around 500 down the home stretch of conference play. Didn't finish the year with the best record that I'm sure they would have hoped. Still 7-13 through their 20 conference games. But I think the Yellow Jackets come in with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. If I remember correctly, I think they defeated Clemson last year, and that was a squad that went to the Elite Eight. They beat UNC as well. So yeah, I lean Georgia Tech as far as a squad that I think could exceed some of their preseason expectations.
I personally think Notre Dame could be that team that jumps ahead an extra year because Marcus Burton is back. And that dude can get a bucket. Averaged almost 18 a game last year. And I think Micah Shrewsbury is a pretty solid coach. He said last year that his team would not go to the ACC tournament on a Tuesday again. I mean, he's got to hold up to that deal now. But they brought in a couple transfers. His son is still there, Braden, and he can shoot the lights out of the ball. I think Notre Dame might be a sneaky team this year. On the other end, what about a disappointment? I'm going with NC State. They're kind of smack dab in the middle of the conference mix right now, and they brought in transfers. Dontrez Styles, UNC, Georgetown, Brandon Huntley Hatfield, who was at one point a Syracuse favorite. People really wanted him at the 315. Started off his career at Tennessee. That didn't really work out. Then went to Louisville and played pretty well. But there's just so much new and so much bouncing around. And then they're going to go play for Kevin Keatts, who I'm not convinced is a good coach. I think the magic of DJ Burns led that North Carolina State team pretty darn far. But I don't think Kevin Keatts really had much to do with that. Remember last year, North Carolina State played Syracuse and DJ Burns came off the bench?
Yep.
Like, what? Didn't make any sense. So even though Kevin Keatts got a great extension, I think he's going to rest on his laurels, and this North Carolina State team is probably going to fall on its face.
I can't say I'm very surprised that that's who you went with.
No.
I have two that come to mind here. One I think is Virginia, just based on the nature of a new head coach a couple of weeks before the season starts. That's not an indictment.
No Reese Beekman either.
It's not an indictment on their team, but just more of the situation that I think will be some growing pains. The other that comes to mind is Pitt. Pitt has lost a couple of their guys over the years. No more Blake Hinson on this squad. They still have the Diaz-Graham twins, but this is a Panthers squad that has leaned on experience for the past couple of years. And, those juniors, seniors, grad students that have been around the block, they don't have it anymore. It's a much younger Panthers squad for Jeff Capel. So I'm not holding my breath on if the Panthers will impress this season.
All right. Johnny, who's your preseason ACC player of the year?
I think it's gotta be Cooper Flagg. I think he's the name that a lot of people will gravitate to, and for good reason. And just as much confidence as I have in him winning the award, Ian, to your point from earlier, there just aren't a lot of dudes looking across the conference that jump off the page at you for an award like that. Now, RJ Davis is one of them. He's probably the, 1B if Flagg is 1A. But outside of that, your guess is as good as mine.
I've got Hunter Salas.
Okay.
Fan favorite of Christian O'Jackson and the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. I think RJ Davis is going to be asked to do a bit too much this year because Elliot Cadeau last year showed no signs of being a scorer, and they don't have Baycott to rely on inside. I think this Wake team lines up really well. You got a really experienced backcourt, and you've got a new 5-star front court with Efton Reed and Omaha Billiou, who transferred from Iowa State. I think Hunter Salas, who already showed that he could go get it last year, averaged around 18 a game, I think he's going to be even better. And I think this Wake Forest team will probably compete at the top of the ACC, and that keeps Salas around in the race. That is kind of a long shot pick, though. Flagg is clearly the favorite. And Duke played a scrimmage against Lincoln of Pennsylvania, and he looked the part.
It was about what you would expect. Yes.
I don't think there's any question about who's going to win Freshman of the Year. If it's not Cooper Flagg, Johnny, is there another name that comes to mind?
Yeah, reading up, the name that a lot of people seem to be excited about is this dude, Ian Jackson on North Carolina, who is going to have an interesting path to playing time because of the Cadeau and RJ Davis backcourt. But towards the top of a lot of the recruiting metrics coming out of high school. Obviously, with Hubert Davis, his ability to coach, guards and really get them to reach their peak. He's probably the name I'd say most worthy of keeping an eye on from a freshman. Obviously, Donnie Freeman too, but we want to expand beyond the Central New York.
This is a non-Syracuse centric ACC preview.
Yes, I'll go Ian Jackson in that regard.
Okay, I got a sleeper here too. Jalil Bethea at Miami. They lost a lot. Wooga Poplar's in the portal. He's gone to Villanova. Bensley Joseph is gone. Pretty much all they have is Nigel Pack. Oh, Norchad Omir's gone too. So all that's there is Nigel Pack and Matthew Cleveland. But, I mean, it's really Nigel Pack. So they need someone else who can score. Last year it was Kaishan George. This year it's Jalil Bethea. Shot over 40% in EYBL and almost 60% from two. Super quick release point. And I think he can do a bit more with the ball than most people expect. So keep an eye on Jalil Bethea, freshman at Miami. Defensive player of the year in the ACC, Johnny. Who are you thinking?
See, this one is interesting because usually you lean big man. Yeah. And we were talking earlier about just kind of the lack of high quality big men that are out there. Like, could I see Cooper Flagg maybe winning defensive player of the year as well? Yeah. There's not a ton of names. There really isn't. Who comes to mind for you?
I got Chase Hunter at Clemson.
Okay.
Back for his 6th year, and he was almost at the top of the conference with Judah Mintz last year for leading the ACC in steals. 6'4", he's built like a tight end almost, and he's a really good defender on the perimeter. I would think either Chase Hunter or Ian Shefflin inside because he's got that Swiss Army knife ability.
Shefflin was the name that I was thinking about floating out there as well, yeah.
Yeah, the Swiss Army knife ability to guard probably 3 through 5 down low. Those two guys will definitely be up there. So those are my two options. But yeah, at one of those Duke freshmen, either Cooper Flagg or Kaman Maluach, 7'2" big out of South Sudan.
Yeah, and nobody's talking about him because it's the Cooper Flagg show in Durham, and for good reason. But that dude can ball as well.
Yeah, I mean, he was in the Olympics as a 17-year-old this past summer. So he's certainly got some weight. All right, last but not least, who is your ACC champion?
I go back and forth. I think Duke and UNC are the two schools that deserve to be up there. I know Clemson and NC State obviously went on their runs. I think it's going to be Duke. I think this is just a well-oiled machine that John Shire's got going on now. There is no more adjustment period, so to speak. The program is firmly his, and he has his grasp and his control. And I think just with the recruiting class combined with the returning talent, if you're not picking the Blue Devils, you are sadly mistaken.
I'm with you. Duke's got my vote, but at the same time, I would love to see a Wake or a Miami or whoever else catch a heater and give them some trouble because it's not fun to see Duke waltz its way through anything.
As long as Malik Brown doesn't go off when the Blue Devils play the Orange.
Yeah, and that has to be an ACC tournament matchup this year. I don't think there's much of a way around it. Seems like those two teams always come to roost in the second, probably the Wednesday noon game.
Yep, that's how it goes.
Wednesday noon, Duke and Syracuse fighting, and Syracuse probably fighting for its life.
Yeah,
that's how the Orange season has gone. Projected 17-13 in KenPom, 10-10 in conference play. We'll see how the Syracuse season shakes out. As Johnny said, another exhibition against Slippery Rock on Wednesday. And then the first game of the Orange season is Monday, November 4th, next Monday against Lemoyne. So we will be back Friday to react to the Slippery Rock game. Hope you guys have a very happy Halloween. Enjoy some pumpkins, some orange candy, whatever you may be doing, trick-or-treating with the kids, with the families. With Johnny, Ian signing off. Make sure to give us a follow on Twitter, F68_Qs. Check us out on YouTube. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.